Welcome to the Word for Life podcast, a daily devotional covering the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation.
In Leviticus chapter 23, we read about God's instructions regarding 7 festivals that Israel needs to celebrate every year. Each of these 7 festivals were celebrated in a different manner, but there were 2 common things. One, Israel held a sacred assembly and people came together in collective worship. Number 2, Israelites did not work during these festival days. And to stress this second point, the first festival described is the weekly Sabbath itself. Verse 3 reads, "There are 6 days when you may work, but the 7th day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work. Wherever you live, it is a Sabbath to the Lord." Friends, Israel was the only nation on earth who had this concept called Sabbath. No other people group or nation before or during Moses' time even thought of the Sabbath. Yes, people belonged to the noble or aristocratic ruling class had rest, but generally everyone else worked. So the Lord commanded Israel to rest one day. Israel had experienced non-stop labor in Egypt, but the Lord had delivered them. Now they are expected to honor the Lord who delivered them by celebrating the Sabbath. Additionally, Israel needs to show mercy and justice to their slaves and animals by giving them also rest. Friends, we live in a world where the city never sleeps. There is no time to rest and refresh. Many people do not want to trust God for their future, but simply they trust the work of their hands. But believers, trust the Lord and take adequate rest. Our God rests, so must we. Second on the list is the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. God insists again that people will not work on these days, but reflect on God's salvation from Egypt and worship Him. Regarding these 2 festivals, verse 7 and 8 says, "On the first day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. For 7 days present a food offering to the Lord, and on the 7th day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work." Friends, both these festivals reminded Israel of the Exodus or escape from Egyptian slavery. You see, in Egypt, Israel had to work tirelessly under the merciless slavery of Pharaoh. Now, because the Lord has given them rest from Pharaoh's slavery, they can celebrate how the Lord has provided them food even without working as slaves. Friends, believers have been given a greater rest today. Their Pharaoh is sin, Satan, and self. But Christ has led us out of the tyranny of sin, Satan, and self. And God provides salvation and all that we need today. The third festival is about first fruits. In Israel, the barley harvest came first and then the wheat harvest. So when Israel reaped the barley harvest, they must bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain they harvest. Then when the wheat harvest arrives, they again need to bring the first wheat grain to the temple. And verse 14 says, "You must not eat any bread or roasted or new grain until the very day you bring this offering to the Lord." Friends, this is not to manipulate the Lord to give them a good harvest, but this festival is to acknowledge that the Lord was the one who gave them the strength to work in the field and be resourceful. Friends, even today, believers acknowledge God's grace each step of the way. They do not credit themselves for their success. Our God claims the credit for all success. The fourth festival is the Festival of Weeks. A total of 50 days after they offered the first fruits of the barley harvest, Israel needs to celebrate the end of the harvest also. But in this festival, Israel needs to specifically remember the poor. Verse 22 reads, "When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God." Friends, believers not only credit God for the rich harvests, but also remember the poor when the Lord provides their needs. God's blessings are not only for them, but has to be shared with people like Ruth who are looking for grain that may have fallen on the ground. Believers follow the example of Boaz in providing and sharing with people like Ruth from the abundance God gives them. Friends, our God remembers the weak, and so do we. The fifth festival is the festival of trumpets. Little is said about this festival, but what we know is that trumpets will be blown in a loud blast. You see, we know from other events in Israel's history that trumpets were sounded in a loud blast when the law was received at Sinai. The loud trumpet sound reminded Israel of the covenant God made with them. God has been faithful to the covenant and Israel remembers that God has been faithful to the covenant. In later Judaism, this day became New Year's Day, again emphasizing a new start with the Lord. Today, many Christians celebrate the New Year in a watch night service. This gives them hope that the Lord will be faithful yet another year. Friends, our God is a God of new beginnings, and we can follow Him. The sixth day is the Day of the Atonement. This was the day Israel's sins were totally covered and forgiven. A special ceremony led by the high priest led to the cleansing of the tabernacle, the priests, and the people. Specially, a scapegoat was sent away from the camp to take away the sins of Israel. Friends, believers today celebrate a God who forgives and takes away their sins so that they can stay safe in God's presence. The seventh and final festival in this chapter is the Festival of Tabernacles. This was the most joyous celebration in the year. A significant feature of this festival was that citrus fruits and olives will be harvested, and they will be taken to the altar in a joyful procession along with branches from palm, myrtle, and willow trees. Verse 40 to 42 reads, "On the first day you are to take branches from luxuriant trees, from palms, willows, and other leafy trees, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Celebrate this as a festival to the Lord for 7 days each year. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Celebrate it in the 7th month." And not only this, according to verse 42, Israel will live in temporary shelters for 7 days. You see, Israel, when they were in the wilderness, lived in temporary tents for 40 years. Yet they survived because of God's protection. Now that they are blessed in the promised land with stone houses, they still need to remember that it is the Lord who still protects them. Friends, believers may be blessed with material things today, but those material things are not their security. God is their security. Our God is our security now and forevermore. What then is the point of all these festivals? You see, Israel knew that God was their provider, savior, redeemer, strength and security. But they are expected to take time off from regular work and reflect on these things of their God. Friends, believers today make time and celebrate special times to honor the Lord. And they remind themselves of who God is in their lives.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow for the next episode of the Word for Life podcast.